My name is Madeline Cole. And I never thought the most humiliating moment of my life would happen behind a glass wall. But there I was, standing outside the conference room I had practically lived in for the last year and a half, watching through the glass as champagne bottles popped and laughter filled the air. I didn't even need to hear what Elliot was saying to know I wasn't invited. I saw him gesture in my direction with that dismissive wave he always used when he wanted someone to leave. He tilted his head, half smiled, and mouthed something I'll never forget. This meeting is for real contributors only. Cole. Maybe next year. Then he turned around and closed the door, leaving me on the outside, staring in like a stranger to my own success. For a moment, I didn't move. I couldn't. My feet felt like they were glued to the hallway carpet. Inside that room, they were celebrating the successful completion of Verticor's biggest project to date. A custom healthcare data platform valued at over $2 million. The very same platform I had spent 18 months building, fixing, coordinating, and keeping alive through sheer force of will. I gave up weekends for that project. I canceled holidays. I worked nights until the janitor asked if I even had a home. I became the person people turned to when the timelines broke down, when communication failed, when something just didn't make sense. And yet, when it came time to recognize the people who made it happen, I was standing outside a closed door. They were passing around flutes of champagne and giving speeches about teamwork and innovation. I was trying not to cry in a hallway I used to sprint through with coffee in hand, rushing between meetings I wasn't allowed to lead. I could see one of the new hires, someone who'd only been on the project 6 months, laughing at something Elliot said, probably a joke at my expense. The glass wall made it easy to watch everything while feeling like I wasn't really there. I kept waiting for someone to notice. At a glance, a nod, a tap on the glass with a look that said, "We didn't forget about you." But nothing came. No one looked. No one noticed I was missing. Or worse, maybe they did notice, and they just didn't care. That was somehow harder to stomach. I should have walked away, but I didn't. I stood there for 10 minutes, maybe more, letting that ache in my chest settle into something deeper, something colder. I wasn't just hurt. I was done. Done believing that hard work speaks for itself. Done pretending I didn't know how this game was played. I watched Elliot clink glasses with the executive team and suddenly understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. They were never going to let me in. Not really. Not unless I forced my way to the table. And in that moment, watching my own work being toasted without me, I made a decision. Not to cry. Not to beg. But to reclaim what was already mine. When I graduated from business school, everyone assumed I'd take a high-paying role at one of the big consulting firms. I had the degree, the internships, the network, but instead, I applied for an entry-level data coordinator job at a mid-sized tech firm called Verticore Solutions. Most people had never even heard of the company. The salary was less than what I paid in monthly student loan interest. My classmates thought I was insane, but I had my reasons, and not even my closest friends knew the truth about why I chose that place, or that role. Verticore wasn't just some random company to me. My grandfather, Charles Verta, had founded it 3 decades ago. It started in a garage and grew into a multi-million-dollar operation, serving health systems across the country. But I wasn't just his granddaughter. I was also the daughter he never really accepted. My mom married a man my grandfather didn't approve of. Dad didn't have the right last name, the right background, the right anything. When she chose him, she lost her seat at the family table. I was just a baby when it happened, but the impact of that choice shaped everything in my life. My last name isn't Verta. It's Cole, my dad's. And I grew up far away from boardrooms and business trips. My mom worked 2 jobs. We didn't talk about the Verta side of the family. The name was like a closed chapter in a book I wasn't allowed to read. But my grandfather didn't forget us completely. When he passed away, He left 60% of the company to be split between my mom and me. My mom placed her shares into a trust I wouldn't be able to touch until I turned 25. She called it a shield. I always saw it as a test. The year I applied to Verticor, I was 24 and 6 months away from that birthday. The lawyers started calling. They wanted to talk about the trust, about succession, about majority ownership. But I wasn't interested in walking into a boardroom and claiming a throne I hadn't earned. What I wanted, maybe even needed, was to understand the company from the ground up, not from spreadsheets and reports, but from the break room coffee, the overdue tickets, the broken communication between teams. I didn't want to inherit leadership. I wanted to earn it. So I sent in a resume that said Madeline Cole, not Verta. I didn't mention my background. I didn't use connections. I got the job the same way anyone else would have, with a decent interview and a willingness to start at the bottom. It felt right at the time, like the only way to begin. The first few weeks were strange. I knew more about the company's structure than some of my managers, but I kept my head down. I listened. I learned. I wanted to see what the culture was like without the influence of my name, and it didn't take long to realize things weren't as polished as they looked from the outside. There were cracks everywhere. Silos between departments. Mid-level managers hoard power. Projects dragged for weeks because no one wanted to make a call without someone else's approval. And underneath it all, people were tired, worn down by politics and red tape, and a total lack of trust. Still, I believed in what the company could be. I saw the potential, the talent, the moments of innovation that sparkled through the mess. And a quiet voice inside me kept saying, "Maybe you're meant to fix this?" Not as an owner, not as the founder's granddaughter, but as someone who understands what it feels like to be unseen. That's why I stayed. That's why I pushed through the frustration. I wasn't just working a job. I was preparing, watching, waiting, not for the right title or the perfect moment, but for the time being. I know I could change things from the inside out. 8 months into the job, Elliot called me into his office. He said we had just landed the biggest contract in Verticor's history, a healthcare tech platform that would unify patient data across multiple hospital systems. The deal was worth $2 million, and it needed someone to coordinate every moving part. The senior developers were already maxed out. The project managers had too much on their plates. Elliot needed someone who could bridge the gaps, keep the teams in sync, and make sure we delivered. He said I was the most organized person he had, and that I had a knack for translating chaos into structure. Then he offered me the job, with a catch. I'd be doing senior-level work for an entry-level salary. I didn't even blink. I said yes, because at that point, I still believed that working hard and proving your value would eventually be enough. I still believe people like Elliot recognized effort when they saw it. I had no idea how wrong I was. From the start, the project was a mess. The timeline was too tight. The client changed requirements every other week. One of our lead engineers quit 3 months in, and we couldn't find a replacement for almost 6 weeks. I ended up writing documentation, fielding client calls, and even testing code I didn't fully understand, just to keep the momentum going. There were nights I slept on the couch in the break room. I stopped answering personal calls. I missed my best friend's wedding, 2 birthdays, and Thanksgiving. I lived on vending machine granola bars and black coffee. My body ached constantly. My inbox had 200 unread messages at any given moment. But I kept going, because I thought this was my chance. At meetings, Elliot would take my slide deck and present it like it was his. He'd talk about strategy and delivery milestones I had built from scratch. When the client praised our responsiveness, he smiled like it was all his doing. The first few times, I told myself it didn't matter. I knew what I'd done. The team knew too. But over time, that confidence started to crack. I'd suggest changes in planning sessions, and he'd shoot them down, only to repeat the same ideas word for word to leadership later. I tried to speak up in a cross-department call once, and he talked over me, then muted me. He called it an accident. It wasn't. Despite everything, I delivered. The platform was working. The client was thrilled. They even hinted at future deals. I thought maybe, just maybe, all that pain had been worth it, that I'd finally get to be part of something that mattered. That when the time came, I'd be seen. But recognition never came. My name wasn't on the update emails. I wasn't invited to briefings with the executive team. Elliot even gave a keynote about the project at a tech summit and didn't mention me once. Not even in the footnotes. Still, I told myself to wait. That was when the project wrapped, and I'd finally be given credit. That there'd be a bonus, a thank you, something. I just had to hold on a little longer. But what I got instead was a locked door and a smirk from the man who had drained me of everything I had to give. And that's when I realized this wasn't about merit or loyalty or even success. It was about power. And Elliot had made it painfully clear who he thought deserved to hold it. 2 weeks before the project was set to launch. Elliot gathered everyone in the common room. His grin was wider than usual, his voice louder, his words dripping with self-congratulation. He said the client was so impressed with our work that they were issuing a $300,000 performance bonus to be distributed among the team. People cheered. Some clapped. Others looked around in disbelief. For a moment, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in months, hope. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the moment someone finally saw what I had given. Then Elliot kept talking. He said the bonus would be divided among senior leadership and department heads. He praised their vision, their coordination, and their relentless execution. He used phrases I had written in emails, in briefs, and in planning decks. But he never looked in my direction, never said my name. After the meeting, I waited until the room was almost empty. I walked up to him and asked if I'd be included in the bonus meeting. I reminded him I had coordinated the entire project for 18 months. He didn't even hesitate. He laughed under his breath and said I'd done a great job with admin work. But the leadership had come from above. I felt something inside me snap. Not loud, not dramatic, just a small, clean break where faith used to live. I nodded, said thank you, and walked out. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing how much that dismissal hurt. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the ceiling. My laptop was still open with timelines and tickets, and QA reports I had planned to polish before launch. But I couldn't look at them. My chest was tight. My jaw ached from clenching. Around midnight, I pulled out the folder the lawyers had sent me months ago. I hadn't touched it, not once. It had stayed in the back of my closet, like a secret I wasn't ready to confront. But now, it felt like a weapon. And I was ready to use it. I picked up my phone and dialed. When the voice answered, I didn't hesitate. This is Madeline Cole. I'm ready to move forward with the ownership transfer. How soon can we make it official? The lawyer paused, then said they could have everything ready by morning. He reminded me that once I accepted, there'd be no going back. No more anonymity. No more hiding behind a regular title. I told him I wasn't hiding anymore. I hung up and sat in the silence of that moment. For the first time in a long time, I felt clear. Not angry, not broken, just clear. Elliot had taken everything from me, my credit, my dignity, my time. But he was never going to take my name. And come morning, that name would mean something again. By sunrise, the paperwork was finalized. The signatures were in place. My shares were transferred from the trust to my name, giving me a controlling interest in Verticore Solutions. At 7:03 a.m., I opened my work laptop and typed a short email. Subject line, emergency all hands meeting, 10:00 a.m. Attendance required. I sent it to the entire company, from entry-level analysts to senior executives, and hit send before I could second-guess myself. Elliot replied within 15 minutes. His tone was sharp, clipped, and smug. He called it a mistake. said only executive management had the authority to call company-wide meetings. Then he followed up with another email canceling it altogether, as if that would be enough to make me back down. What he didn't expect was the next email. This one came from the board's legal liaison, addressed to every department head, confirming that the meeting had been approved by the majority shareholder and that attendance was mandatory. No exceptions, no rescheduling. I watched the inbox go quiet after that. By 9:45, the office felt like it was holding its breath. People whispered in break rooms, speculating about what the meeting could possibly be about. Some thought someone had been fired. Others wondered if the project had failed or the client had backed out. But the most common question floating through the halls was this: why was a junior analyst calling an all-hands meeting? At 9:59, I walked to conference room B, the same one I'd stood outside of just 2 days earlier. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't. I could feel it pounding through my ribs, but I didn't stop. Inside. The room filled quickly. Elliot stood off to the side, arms crossed, lips tight. He avoided my eyes. People looked confused, curious. Some annoyed. No one knew what was coming. Not yet. But that was about to change. I stepped up to the front of the room and looked at every face. Then I took a breath and began. I stood at the front of the room and waited until the last shuffle of chairs settled into silence. My voice came out steady, clear. I told them my name was Madeline Cole, but that wasn't the full story. I said I was also Madeline Verda, granddaughter of the company's founder, and as of that morning, majority shareholder with controlling interest in Verticore. There was a pause long. Stunned, weighty. I could almost feel the room tilt. Heads turned. Whispers started. Elliot laughed nervously and tried to interrupt. I held up one hand and didn't let him speak. I reminded the room of Project Clarity, the 18-month initiative they had just finished celebrating without me. I listed every department I had coordinated, every crisis I had resolved, and every success they had called someone else's. Then I opened the folder in my hand. First, I announced that the $300,000 performance bonus would be restructured and redistributed based on actual contribution, not title. Anyone who had put in the work would be rewarded fairly. Those who had shown up late and taken credit for others would get nothing. There were a few gasps, a few surprised smiles. Next, I addressed the room's elephant, Elliot. I stated clearly, without anger, that his employment was terminated effective immediately for abuse of authority, exclusionary leadership, and falsifying contribution. His mouth dropped open. His hands twitched. He looked around the room for support and found none. He tried to argue. He mentioned contracts. I reminded him that we were an at-will company and that I had documentation for every decision. Then I made a quick call to security and asked them to escort him from the building. As he was led out, no one clapped, no one cheered, but no one stopped it either. And in that stillness, something shifted. I looked at the team and told them this wasn't about revenge. It was about fairness. We were going to build a culture that rewarded effort, not politics. And it started today. The days that followed were messy. People were stunned, cautious, unsure of what came next. But underneath that hesitation, something new was starting to grow. A kind of quiet hope. I spent my first week in leadership meeting with every department, not in a boardroom, but at their desks. I asked questions. I listened more than I spoke. I wanted to know what actually made their jobs hard, what they loved, and what they'd never dared to say before. We restructured the org chart, not with sweeping layoffs, but with smarter alignment. Leaders were selected based on initiative and team trust, not just tenure. Those who had led with fear were quietly let go. No drama, no shame, just a clean, respectful end. We rebuilt our project workflow. We created open channels between teams, knocked down the barriers that had turned collaboration into conflict. Everyone had visibility, input, and ownership. Credit flowed to the people who earned it. Promotions came from real results, not just favors. Some people left. That was okay. They weren't interested in change, and we didn't hold it against them. But most stayed. And for the first time, they started speaking up, offering ideas, taking risks, believing their voices mattered. We implemented flexible hours, adjusted pay scales, created space for feedback loops that actually got answered. Our internal surveys saw a 40% increase in satisfaction within 6 months. More importantly, the laughter came back. You could feel it in the halls. 3 months in, we landed a new contract worth $4 million, then another. Clients told us they chose us because we were transparent, responsive, and surprisingly human for a tech firm. That made me proud in a way I hadn't expected. 1 year to the day after I stood outside that glass door, we gathered again. This time, the entire company was invited. No locked rooms, no exclusion, just one long table filled with food, music in the background, and glasses raised for the right reasons. I stood at the center and gave a short toast. I didn't talk about revenge. I talked about gratitude. I thanked the people who stayed, the ones who believed change was possible. I reminded them that leadership isn't about being right. It's about creating space for others to be brilliant. They clapped, some cheered, a few smiled like they hadn't in years. It wasn't a perfect company, not yet, but it was honest now, and it was ours. I looked around that room and realized the difference was simple. A year ago, I stood outside watching others celebrate my work. Now, I was celebrating with the people who helped build something better. Together. I didn't start this journey looking for revenge. I wasn't trying to expose anyone or burn anything down. I just wanted to be seen, to be heard, to be treated like what I contributed mattered. For a long time, I told myself that if I worked hard enough, someone would eventually notice. That if I just stayed patient, stayed humble, stayed quiet, the recognition would come. But the truth is, the world doesn't always work that way. Sometimes, the people in charge don't want to share the spotlight. Sometimes, they take credit because they can. Sometimes, they convince you that your value is tied to your title, your salary, or how well you stay in line. And before you know it, you start shrinking to fit a space that was never built for you. I let that happen for longer than I care to admit. I doubted myself, second-guessed my worth, and told myself maybe I hadn't done enough. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had done more than enough. I had carried that project, that team, that vision, and still, I was left outside the door. Taking back my power wasn't about ego. It was about survival. It was about choosing not to disappear. I didn't need applause. I needed agency. And once I realized I already had the tools to make change, I stopped waiting for permission to use them. If you've ever found yourself in that same place watching someone else get the credit, get the opportunity, get the seat at the table you helped build. I want you to know you're not alone, you're not invisible, and you're not powerless. You have a story, you have an impact, and you have every right to step into the space you've earned, even if it means making that space yourself. If this story reminded you of your own, I hope you'll share it in the comments, with a friend, with someone who needs to hear it, because every time we speak up, we make it a little easier for the next person to do the same. And if no one has told you lately, your work matters, your voice matters, you matter. Thanks for listening to mine. I'll see you in the next story.